Years after hearing the score for the first time, I'm glad and honored to be standing here. Honored the author of it. I am capable of filmmaking. I attended a film school. I'm pretty good at it. I did some studying. You've rehearsed it a lot, and I understand what you're doing. Avoid those artistic endeavors at all costs. Films that are abstract, I challenge you to do AMR. I replied, for God's sakes, I'm 23 years old. I can do a comedy. I can do anything. George Lucas just broke his silence at the age of 81. The man behind Star Wars spent decades concealing something. A collection of concepts, figures, and literature applies a variety of other things. We could continue to create Star Wars for another century. A automobile accident almost killed him in 1962. He wouldn't make it, according to the doctors. However, the events that transpired during those 4 months of recuperation would permanently alter the film. Industry. Lucas is now telling the truth after years of silence. Okay, we'll do this, but you gotta get a big star or a big name connected with it, I responded. Well, it's a movie about teenagers. I can't get a star connected with it. The betrayals that nearly brought him to ruin. This grit he concealed from his own players, as well as the startling choice that ultimately cost him billions. His admission will change your perspective on Star Wars. On May 14, 1944, George Lucas was born in Modesto, California. His dad operated a small walnut ranch and a stationery store. His mother frequently visited and left hospitals due to chronic health problems, which caused the house to feel quiet and empty. George was raised in a devout Methodist home, where diligence and self-control were valued highly. His dad anticipated him and the family business to eventually be taken over by his siblings. However, George was. When Disneyland first opened for business in July 1955, the Lucas family left at that time. Young people were deeply impacted by just one visit. George, something was aroused by the rides, the stories, and the fantasy that would never settle again inside him. When George was younger, he was fixated with science fiction. He had an insatiable appetite for Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon. He was a comic book reader, continuously, and sketched aliens and spaceships in his notebooks. Additionally, he read adventure novels like Robinson Treasure Island and Crusoe. His favorite, though, was Flash Gordon. He observed after school, they cows religiously. That fixation wasn't only a hobby. He began constructing stories in his mind, imagining bizarre new universes and outlining concepts. Years later, when he was unable to obtain the rights to create a Flash Gordon film, same early fixation would become Star Wars, something very different. However, maturing wasn't simple. George was little, quiet, and reserved at Thomas Downey High School in Modesto. He was a simple target at school because he was only 5'7". As an adult, for those that bully others, most of the time, he felt invisible and preferred to retreat into vintage movie calendars and miniature automobiles. He stayed out of trouble in crowds. However, in there was a change in photography class. In the background, George wasn't a target, he was a spectator. His professors became aware that he had a talent for composition and narrative. These early hardships influenced his behavior, even though he still stayed to himself. Considered the characters, he became interested in outsiders, underdogs, and somebody who didn't quite belong. At best, he received mediocre grades in school, primarily Cs and C-. He freely acknowledged that he didn't care much about academics and spent much of his classes daydreaming. He had two passions, automobiles and as well as cameras. After school, he would work on a little yellow Italian for hours. Vehicle known as an auto by Bianina. The Fiat 500 served as its model, and George was utterly fixated on racing it. He simultaneously made use of his family's 8mm Mamera to capture Modesto auto races. His parents believed that everything was at a version. However, it wasn't. It was the start of something much more significant. June 12, 1962, was the day that everything changed. 3 days before his high school graduation, George was driving his modified Bianchina home after graduation. Frank Ferrer, a classmate, a big Chevy Impala at high speed and attempting to overtake George right when he was entering the driveway of his family. George's small automobile was struck by the Chevy. The Bianina crashed into a walnut tree after repeatedly flipping, though the car was so badly damaged that a picture of it showed up on the front page of the Modesto. Frank, who drove away in his bigger vehicle without it. George's seatbelt broke, although it scratched. That could have prevented him from dying because, before it crumpled like paper against the tree, it threw him out of the automobile. When the paramedics showed up, George had stopped breathing. A heartbeat was absent. They hurried him to the hospital, where he was on the verge of passing away. He had shattered lungs. He had shattered ribs. He regurgitated his skin and blood turned bluish. He was in critical care for 2 weeks, barely surviving. Despite the doctor's predictions that he wouldn't survive, he did. Afterwards, George stated that he became aware of how hazy the boundary between life and death is after the accident. That collision altered his perspective entirely. I made a decision to turn my life into something worthwhile. He stated, George was unable to engage in any of his favorite physical activities during the 4 arduous months he spent recuperating, so he began reading, consuming books on anthropology, philosophy, and mythology. From a low-income student, he had a keen interest in the globe. His time in bed gave him a new purpose, as he thought about his life and future. He also started to struggle with survivor's guilt, questioning why he was still alive. The deeper themes in his writings would be shaped by that question, which would haunt him for years. Purpose, destiny, and the silent path of a hero. George enrolled in Modesto after recovering. In junior college, he studied philosophy and psychology, which he took his first film lesson, and while he was not in school, his grades improved. He continued to photograph automobile races from the sidelines, even though he no longer raced vehicles. He got to know Haskell Wexler, a fellow filmmaker, through this safer endeavor. Wexler, a racing aficionado, recognized George's potential and urged him to apply to USC's School of Cinematic Arts. George graduated with an associate's degree in 1965 and moved to USC, marking the conclusion of his racing career, but the start of everything else. George was all in at USC, having finished 2 years of he enrolled in the program at the age of 21 and completed undergraduate courses in a single year. Became close friendships with Caleb Dessel, John Milius, and Walter Murch, among other aspiring filmmakers. Was dubbed the Dirty Dozen. If you visit Hollywood, you'll discover that I hope you don't, because you do not wish to be subjugated by those who lack your level of intelligence. Lester Novos was one instructor who had a significant impact on him. He taught a boot instead of merely narrating stories, using color, light, and movement. Another mentor was he learned how to control time and emotion through montage from Slavoj Vorkapić, whose teachings would influence Lucas' distinctive style of filmmaking. George produced a short film in 1967 titled THX 11384E. Electronic Labyrinth was a 15-minute dystopian movie about people were startled by how sophisticated it was. A man fleeing a surveillance state seemed and sounded like a student. Production, Lucas had figured up a cunning way to escape. He offered to teach an unwelcome Navy class at USC, giving him access to costly resources. He used color, film, and lab processing, and the Navy personnel served as his cast and crew. At night, at actual places like UCLA and LAX, the finished product earned him a 6-month internship at Warner Brothers and the Samuel Warner Memorial Scholarship. Years later, the library of it was kept in the National Film Registry by Congress. At USC, Lucas didn't simply work hard. He didn't get any sleep. He edited films for 18 hours every day. Frequently, he started a tiny club called the Clean Cut Cinema Club with Don Glut and Chris, and he experimented late into the night. Lewis. They established Sunrise Productions, and Lucas even utilized the for a while. They were known as Lucas Beaumont, and their most ambitious endeavor was the unfinished movie 543. Orgy Beach Party, which was supposed to be a fictitious documentary about a fictitious beach film, was odd, imaginative, and innovative. During these years, George also grew close to Steven Spielberg and Martin Scorsese. After graduating from college, Lucas had an unforeseen circumstance. He was drafted for the Vietnam War. He was 23 at the time of the examination, but physicians discovered that he inherited his grandfather's type 2 diabetes. He was given the 4F designation due to his prior lung injuries from the vehicle accident, which indicated that he was medically unsuitable to serve. He was deeply affected by that rejection. That had caused him to reflect critically on authority and conflict, and he developed a strong skepticism of governments and authoritative persons. He had previously envisioned a student film about a soldier engaged in combat with an aircraft. Through conversations with Francis Ford Coppola, the concept eventually developed into Apocalypse Now. Though indirect, his experience with combat influenced the ideas of rebellion in THX 1138 and Star Wars. However, George Lucas almost lost before Star Wars ever made it to the big screen. Everything began with a movie named THX 11138, which he created using only $777,000. It was odd, icy, and creative, but audiences avoided it when it came out, earning only $2.4 million. Lucas had to personally return his advance to Warner Brothers, and the pressure was so great that failure was devastating. He came to a realization that almost put an end to his directing career before it had ever begun. Agonizing. He couldn't simply produce movies for himself if he wanted to live. Had to consider what viewers were interested in. That disappointment, resentful, embarrassing, costly, and covertly turned into the reason Star Wars ever existed. It showed him Hollywood's harsh reality. If THX 1138 had been a hit, Lucas could have made esoteric art films for the rest of his life, but he was transformed by the anguish. I eventually came to the realization that I needed to retire, and I wanted to proceed and engage in other activities. The treachery escalated the situation. Warner Brothers insulted him in addition to removing funds, compelled Coppola to reimburse his advance, and they destroyed 6 more of his films, was preparing. Then they abruptly removed 5 minutes from THX 11138 without tasking Lucas, who was incensed that they disregarded his final cut rights. In order to prevent Warner from making any more alterations, Lucas and his team took a copy of the movie off Warner's lot. Other than exercising some power, there was no need for them to do it. Felt taken advantage of. That event created a scar that influenced his subsequent fixation with maintaining control. He never forgot what it felt, as though he had lost his voice. The harm continued. American Zoetrope, the business Lucas had assisted in founding, was on the verge of financial collapse. By 1990, it owed just $22.1 million, buried beneath $28.8 million in debt. Coppola alone owes Darien Development $3 million in assets, and another $16.2 Orion Pictures owes $6.2 million, and Hot Weather Films owed $1 million. Lucas had already retreated, and its sibling studio had filed for bankruptcy back in 1983, keeping a safe distance. He had discovered, following THX 1138, that he needed to defend himself. He witnessed the consequences of filmmakers pursuing their dreams without financial preparations. But then everything changed with the release of the unexpected film American Graffiti in 1973, was produced for only $775,000. It brought almost $15 million, which is almost eighth. The kid who failed with THX suddenly had a song that topped the charts. With a 15,000% return, it even smashed popular movies like Live and Let Die at the summer box office. Casting unknowns, he earned $35.4 million. Harrison Ford only had Paul Lamont won a Golden Globe for a little role, something Universal never thought would happen, but it was so successful that Lucas received his first Oscar and was at last free. Nominations. More significantly, he was given the opportunity to retry, and this time, he desired to travel to space. Lucas started creating Star Wars in 1973. However, his initial draft, which he titled Journal of the Wills, was embarrassing. Borrowed passages from A Fighting Man of Mars, written by Edgar Rice Burroughs in 1931. Even worse, Lucas partially plagiarized Donald Ritchie's book about Akira Kurosawa. It could have put an end to him if anyone had discovered it. But Lucas continued to rewrite for 3 years. He toiled 8 hours a day, gradually transforming stolen pulp into something original. He found The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell, which he used as a guide. He transformed humiliation into myth. Disney said, or Bob Iger said. We were discussing retirement and what you would do after all of this. So I said, if you truly want to sell your company, if you're thinking about selling it, then came the historic contract. In 1975, 20th Century Fox awarded him a deal for they believed it to be a vanity endeavor and did not believe in Star Wars. Lucas proposed to reduce his $500,000 compensation to $150,000 in exchange for all rights to sequels and merchandise. They agreed, laughing, and believed that toys were worthless, but Fox lost billions as a result of that one choice. By 2014, the Star Wars the toys alone brought in $5 billion annually, but the franchise was valued at $37 billion. Lucas attempted to sell the toy rights to several firms in 2016, but only because Kenner agreed to accept only $100,000 and a 5% share for each item. Lucas saw aware of the legacy that exists. Yet he never forgot that he was a billionaire. It doesn't make writing any simpler. I'll tell you, I have to just work and do my job every day. Making Star Wars wasn't magic, though, and it doesn't even make directing that much simpler. Was a nightmare. On March 22, 1976, filming got underway in Tunisia. The desert saw its first winter rain in 50 years. On the second day of filming, halted, crew workers contracted dysentery. And Stuart Freeborn, the creature designer, was hospitalized after contracting pneumonia. London, the motors of R2-D2 failed, and Anthony Daniels' suit was slashed and broken by C-3PO. Foot. The props didn't function. On April 7th, they relocated to Larray Studios in London. The British crew rejected the movie, calling it a children's cartoon. Unless they received overtime, they were required to work past 5:30 p.m. Kenny Baker, the man inside everyone, treated it poorly, and R2-D2 subsequently acknowledged that he believed it would fail, like a joke. The effects were more severe. Lucas had constructed a since no one else could do what he wanted. He founded a firm named Industrial Light and Magic. However, when he visited ILM, they had only completed 7 shots during post-production, and he stated that just one was usable. The picture, which had a budget of only $11 million, cost more over $1 million. Lucas was enraged. The group moved slowly and unhurriedly. Distra, the manager, couldn't handle it. Lucas took over, dismissed his editor, and worked on the weekends. He did whatever it required to cut scenes personally. And without him, Star Wars he saved it, by bleeding for it, and the pressure almost made it look like a joke. Killed him. Lucas, 28, had just gotten into another altercation with Dijkstra when he felt he was hurried because he felt a strong ache in his chest and thought he was having a heart attack. To the hospital, where the physicians diagnosed him with hypertension and severe stress, and advised him to stop or risk his life. Harrison Ford even made fun of the dialogue on set. Lucas believed the film would fail. Tired, he made the decision then and there that he would never lead. I couldn't go through the Star Wars sequel again. Although he persisted for a little while, sufficient. The movie altered everything, earning $1,775 million. When Lucas made a startling decision. Keeping the greatest secret in film history, he determined Darth Vader would be Luke's father. The script mentioned something, but only he and Mark Hamill knew. Otherwise, even the actor inside Vader was unaware that Obi-Wan had killed your father. James Earl Jones later recorded the actual sentences that David Prowse spoke, maintained the integrity of the truth. When the movie came out on May 21, 1980, the globe gasped. Nobody had witnessed the greatest twist in movie history coming. But in the background, Lucas was taking a chance on everything once more. He paid for using his own funds. The Empire Strikes Back. He obtained a loan of $18 million. If it failed, he was destroyed. Expenses increased, stress increased, and his connection with producer Gary Kurtz broke down, claiming that the pressure had an impact on everyone. Lucas, however, refused to relinquish control, and the bet paid off as the film earned $538 million off, and Lucas retained all the rights. Then catastrophe struck. Stage 3 at L Street Studios was destroyed by fire just before production began. Everything burnt. Sets were lost. Trucks couldn't get there quickly because the roads were blocked, and filming was 3 months behind schedule. Stanley Kubrick, who was nearby filming The Shining, used the Lucas's team was incensed that fire was being used as a pretext to demand additional room. Producer Gary rebuilding 64 sets wasn't the most difficult component of the film, according to Kurtz. Simply costly. It almost wrecked them. That production ruined Lucas' friendship with Kurtz. After 10 years of collaboration, Kurtz created American Graffiti and the first Star Wars. By Empire, however, Lucas had made Lucasfilm into a huge business. He began employing foreigners and concentrated on toys, which Kurtz detested. He desired Thatali to matter. They ceased communicating, and Lucas accused Kurtz for each delay. They never collaborated again. Regardless of whether Kurtz quit or was dismissed, Lucas used the funds from Star Wars to construct a stronghold. He purchased acreage for the future Skywalker Ranch in 1978, spanned 4,700 acres, had its own fire, and was built by him for $100 million. Station, a private theater known as the Stag, a lake he named after Ewoks, and it was more than a studio. It had vines, but the most of the land was kept untouched. Was Lucas's haven. He sought peace, and it was so secret that not even President Reagan was permitted to explore it. After earning it, he collaborated with Spielberg to create Raiders. They desired for everything to seem genuine in the Lost Ark. On May 27, 1980, they decided to put risk ahead of safety when they met with ILM to prepare stunts and effects. Severely wounded. But Spielberg and Lucas persisted because they thought that Raiders opening sequence was difficult to shoot, but it turned into they were seeking the truth, no matter the cost. George Lucas released Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, a movie that will unintentionally alter Hollywood forever, with excessively graphic sequences for a PG rating, and viewers watched in terror as 8 children were tortured like slaves. A man's heart was torn from his chest while it was still pumping, and a human when a man was burned alive during the sacrifice. The parents were incensed. They had brought their children in anticipation of another thrilling adventure, similar to Raiders of the Lost Ark, but instead they received fuel for their nightmares. Later, Lucas said that he and Steven Spielberg were experiencing difficult times. George was in the midst of a divorce. Steven had recently split from his partner, and their anguish showed in the movie. Hollywood was compelled to establish a new rating because of the tremendous outcry. Category. The PG-13 rating was created just 2 months after the movie's June 1984 premiere. It all began with Lucas's sadness, and the first films to receive it were Red Dawn and The Woman in Red. Lucas's personal life had fallen apart a year earlier in 1983. On June 16, but George and his wife Marcia were reportedly separating. According to Modesto, B was more than simply his spouse. She was an influential figure and an Oscar-winning editor behind Star Wars, having edited the first movie and influenced its emotional strength. She was the center of Lucasfilm, hosting events and the group, while George concentrated solely on his work, and after they parted ways, Marcia received cash payments ranging from $35 to $50 million, which exceeded the budget of a Lucas had just released Return of the Jedi, a Star Wars film at the time, and sales of Star Wars items were beginning. to decline. After losing his wife, his partner, and suddenly losing half his fortune broke him. He had vowed to take a vacation to spend time with her and their daughter. But he continued to work, and he would pay a price for that error. Everything, Lucas began, selling off pieces of his business to make ends meet. One of since 1979, a small team of computer graphics specialists have been working in secret.